Well, we want to welcome you back to the GLBC Connections for Wednesday, July 8th. As I film this, of course, it's very hot out right now. It's been 90 degrees for at least the past couple of days. It's been nothing but hot, high 80s, low 90s for the last week, and it shows no sign of abating. And that got me to thinking about when I worked back in the glass factories. One of the things that happened to us every summer, there was just something about that summer heat. Things started to go wrong. We typically, in the factories that I worked in, had anywhere from 4 to 6 machines. And what would happen when it heated up, the machines just started having problems. Nothing you could really put your finger on, but just one problem after another. And so we were pretty good. If we had one problem or two problems, we were pretty good about getting the resources distributed out and solving those problems. But man, when the summer hit and it felt like you had 5 or 6, it could quickly feel overwhelming and a little bit out of control sometimes. And so every summer I just kind of knew that was coming and knew as it heated up, we would hit those struggles. And that's a little bit how life is. I think a lot of times, many of us, one problem, two problems, we can handle it. But when they start coming rapid fire, we start to feel quickly out of control. Certainly, I think many of us have experienced those moments in our life where the problems just keep coming so quickly that by the time you even hear about one problem, you've got a new one. I remember one time I was sitting on the sofa, I think reading or taking an afternoon nap one weekend, and Patty came walking in and she said, "Hey, the computer's not working right." And without missing a breath, she looked up over my head and she said, "Is that a roof leak?" And, I can handle one problem, but the two problems without even taking a breath, those rapid fire kinds of things, I got a little exasperated. Multiply that times 5, and we can quickly become very exasperated. Well, that's the situation King David, found himself in the Old Testament. He was king, and he was declared to be king, and he was anointed king by God. And yet, his son Absalom tried to take the throne from him, and slowly but surely, Absalom wrested control of the kingship of the throne from David. He first of all took the trust that the people had in David. Then he took his counselors. Then he took the army, and pretty soon David was on the run. And he was stripped of all resources. And this comes up in Psalm 3, today's psalm. And David writes this: "Lord, how many are my foes? How many rise up against me? Many are saying of me, God will not deliver him." Here we see David stripped of all his resources, all the things that made him king, crying out to God, saying, I'm at the end of my rope. And maybe today you're at the end of your rope, or you remember times when you feel you're at the end of the rope. Psalm 3 is for people who feel like they are at the end of the rope. The problems are coming too fast, too quickly to really get control of. That's where David's at. Verse 3, though, David changes his tune. He says, "But you, Lord, are a shield around me, my glory, the one who lifts my head high." David, even in the midst of this, recognizes that the Lord is the one in whom he trusts. His situation is difficult. It is overwhelming. He's at the end of his rope. He has no resources left. He's on the run. And yet he trusts in the Lord his God. And he says, "I call out to the Lord, and he answers me from his holy mountain. I lie down and sleep. I wake again, because the Lord sustains me. I will not fear, though tens of thousands assail me on every side. Arise, Lord, deliver me, my God. Strike all my enemies on the jaw. Break the teeth of the wicked." I like the phraseology there. David wants the Lord to punch him in the mouth, I think. From the Lord comes deliverance. May your blessing be on your people. Well, here I think we see David's situation as he writes the psalm, but it's a situation that comes to many of the kings of Israel over the course of the centuries, and comes to the church over the course of centuries, and comes to us on an individual basis. And so Psalm 3 really is written not just to remind us of what David went through, but to remind us that the Lord is our protector, that with the Lord we can go to sleep at night and sleep soundly and know that we are safely in his hands. If today you're at the end of your rope, if you're struggling, if you're frustrated, if you feel like you're running out of resources, I trust that you'll read Psalm 3, pray it back to God. Think about your own situation and how it's similar to David's, and how David trusted in the Lord, and that you can also trust in the Lord. And I just think Psalm 3 is a good reminder that we do come sometimes to the end of our resources and the end of our rope. And yet, even in that, I'm reminded that God brings us to that situation deliberately, that He brings us to the end of that, our resources, the end of our control deliberately, so that at the end of it, we can remember that He is truly the only one who can bring us out. Truly, we are in His hands alone. Thus, coming to the end of our resources, coming to the end of our rope, it's not a bad thing. It's a good thing, because it causes us to turn to the Lord wholeheartedly, to rely on Him, but also because that's where we see Him work. And that's what David saw over and over in his life as king. It's what we see in our lives, and has been how God works throughout the centuries. And so Psalm 3 really is a good reminder of that as well. Thanks for joining us today.